Sarah Martinez walked into the corporate training center with her shoulders straight and her head held high. At 42, she had learned not to let first impressions bother her too much. Still, she couldn't ignore the snickers that followed her as she made her way to the registration desk. The security training program was supposed to be elite. Only the best candidates were selected to join the 3-month intensive course that would prepare them for high-risk corporate security positions. Sarah had applied on a whim, thinking her background might give her an edge over younger candidates. She was wrong about the reception she would receive. "Ma'am, are you sure you're in the right place?" The young receptionist looked at Sarah with barely concealed amusement. "This is the Advanced Tactical Security Program, not the Administrative Assistant course." Sarah smiled politely and handed over her paperwork. "I'm quite sure, thank you." Behind her, she heard hushed conversations among the other trainees. Most were men in their 20s and 30s, all looking like they had stepped out of action movies. They wore tactical pants, combat boots, and shirts that showed off their muscled arms. Sarah, in her simple jeans and sneakers, looked like someone's mother who had wandered into the wrong building. "Look at Grandma over there," whispered one of the younger men to his friend. "I give her 2 days before she quits." "2 days? I say she's gone by lunch," his companion replied, loud enough for Sarah to hear. Sarah pretended not to notice as she collected her training materials and found a seat in the back of the classroom. She had heard worse things before, much worse. The instructor, a former Navy SEAL named Jack, entered the room with the confidence of someone who had seen real combat. His eyes swept over the group of 25 trainees, pausing briefly on Sarah before moving on. "Welcome to hell, people," announced. "For the next 12 weeks, you're going to learn what it really takes to protect high-value targets in dangerous situations. Some of you think you're tough. Some of you think you're smart. By the end of this program, most of you will realize you were wrong about both." He began calling names for the initial assessment. When he reached Sarah's name, he paused and looked up from his clipboard. "Sarah Martinez," he called out, his voice carrying a hint of skepticism. "Here," Sarah replied clearly. Studied her for a moment. "Ma'am, this program is physically and mentally demanding. We have a very high dropout rate. Are you absolutely certain you want to be here?" Before Sarah could answer, one of the younger trainees spoke up. "Come on, instructor. She's obviously in the wrong place. This isn't a cooking class." The comment drew laughter from several other trainees. Sarah felt the familiar burn of anger in her chest, but her expression remained calm. She had learned long ago how to control her emotions under pressure. "I'm exactly where I need to be," Sarah said simply. Nodded slowly. "We'll see about that. Everyone outside for the physical assessment." The group moved to an outdoor course that looked like an obstacle nightmare. There were walls to climb, ropes to traverse, and various challenges designed to test strength, speed, and endurance. The younger trainees were eager to show off, jogging in place and doing stretches that displayed their athletic builds. Sarah quietly observed the course layout, her mind automatically calculating the most efficient path through each obstacle. Old habits died hard. "Ladies first," called out one of the men with a mocking bow towards Sarah. "How thoughtful," Sarah replied with a sweet smile that didn't reach her eyes. She stepped up to the starting line as explained the rules. The course had to be completed in under 15 minutes to pass. The current record, held by a former Army Ranger, was 8 minutes and 37 seconds. "Whenever you're ready, ma'am," said, finger on his stopwatch. Sarah took a deep breath and exploded into motion. She hit the first obstacle, a 8-foot wall, without slowing down. Instead of struggling to pull herself up like most people would, she used a technique she had learned years ago in a very different training program. She was over the wall in seconds. The rope traverse came next. While others might struggle with upper body strength, Sarah moved across with fluid efficiency, her legs doing most of the work while her arms guided her path. Behind her, she could hear the conversations among the watching trainees shift from amusement to confusion. "How is she moving so fast?" someone whispered. The tire run, the low crawl under barbed wire, the balance beams, Sarah moved through each obstacle with practiced precision. Her movements weren't flashy or dramatic. They were simply effective. As she approached the final challenge, a series of targets that had to be hit with thrown knives, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. This was where her real skills would show, though she planned to hold back significantly. The first knife left her hand and struck the center of the target with a solid thunk. The second followed immediately, hitting just inches from the first. The third, fourth, and fifth knives formed a tight group that would have impressed any marksman. Sarah crossed the finish line and checked the large digital clock that displayed her time, 7 minutes and 52 seconds, a new course record. The training area fell completely silent, stared at his stopwatch, then at Sarah, then back at his stopwatch. 7:52, he announced, his voice carefully neutral. The other trainees stood frozen, their earlier amusement replaced by shock and something that might have been fear. Sarah brushed dust off her jeans and walked back to the group as if she had just completed a casual morning jog. "Not bad for Grandma," she said quietly, her voice carrying just enough edge to make her point. Cleared his throat. "Outstanding performance, Martinez. Where did you learn to move like that?" Sarah met his eyes steadily, here and there. For the first time since arriving at the training center, Sarah saw something other than dismissal in the faces around her. She saw curiosity, respect, and in some cases, genuine fear. Good. Maybe now they would take her seriously. But they still had no idea who they were really dealing with. After Sarah's record-breaking performance on the obstacle course, the atmosphere in the training program shifted dramatically. The snickers and dismissive comments stopped, replaced by cautious glances and whispered conversations. But Sarah knew that respect earned through physical prowess was only temporary. She would need to prove herself again and again. The second week of training focused on tactical situations and weapons handling. Sarah found herself paired with a former police officer who had been one of her loudest critics during the first day. He was built like a linebacker and carried himself with the swagger of someone who had never met a challenge he couldn't muscle through. "Look, lady," said as they prepared for the shooting range exercise. "I don't know how you got lucky on that obstacle course, but this is serious business. People could get hurt if you don't know what you're doing." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "You're absolutely right. Safety is very important." The shooting instructor, a woman named Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, distributed the weapons for the exercise. Each trainee received a standard pistol and was expected to demonstrate basic proficiency at various distances. The passing score required hitting the target 8 out of 10 times at 25 yards. Went first, approaching the firing line with confidence. His shots were solid 9 hits out of 10, with most strikes in the outer rings of the target. The other trainees applauded and gave a satisfied nod as he stepped back. "Not bad," Lieutenant Colonel Hayes noted. "Martinez, you're up." Sarah approached the firing line and examined the weapon carefully. She checked the safety, tested the trigger pull, and sighted down the barrel. To the watching trainees, it looked like she was taking an unusually long time to prepare. What they didn't know was that Sarah was deliberately slowing herself down. Her muscle memory wanted to take control, to move with the lightning-fast precision that had kept her alive in places most of these trainees couldn't imagine. But revealing too much too quickly would raise questions she wasn't ready to answer. The first shot rang out, hitting the target dead center. Sarah paused, as if surprised by her own accuracy, then fired again. Another center hit. She continued methodically, placing each shot with careful deliberation. When the smoke cleared, her target showed 10 perfect hits, all within a 2-inch circle at the center of the bulls. The range fell silent except for the ringing in everyone's ears. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes walked downrange to examine the target more closely. When she returned, her expression was troubled. "Martinez, where exactly did you learn to shoot?" Sarah shrugged. "My father taught me when I was young. We used to hunt together." It wasn't entirely a lie. Her father had taught her to shoot when she was 12 years old. But that was long before her real training began, in places where missing your target meant someone else went home to their family instead of you. Hayes studied Sarah intently. "Your grouping is exceptionally tight. That level of precision typically requires extensive training." "I've always been good with my hands," Sarah replied simply. Over the following days, Sarah continued to excel in every area of training while trying to maintain a low profile. During hand-to-hand combat instruction, she allowed herself to be thrown a few times before demonstrating techniques that surprised even the instructors. In tactical planning exercises, she offered suggestions that showed an understanding of urban warfare that seemed impossible for someone with no military background. The other trainees began to treat her with a mixture of respect and suspicion. Some, like, started asking pointed questions about her background. Others kept their distance, unsure what to make of the quiet woman who seemed to know more than she was letting on. It was during the fourth week, during a particularly intense scenario-based training exercise, that Sarah's carefully maintained facade began to crack. The exercise involved a simulated hostage situation in a multi-story building. Trainees were divided into teams and given different roles. Some played hostages, others were the hostage takers, and the rest formed the rescue teams. Sarah found herself assigned to Team Alpha, the primary rescue unit. The team leader was a young man named David, a former Marine who had served one tour in Afghanistan. He was competent and well-meaning, but Sarah could see flaws in his tactical planning that could get people killed in a real situation. "We'll breach through the front entrance," explained to the team. "Quick and aggressive, overwhelm them before they can react." Sarah studied the building layout on the provided blueprints. What about the back stairs? If they have lookouts posted, a frontal assault will just... "With respect, Sarah," interrupted. "I've done this before, trust me." Sarah wanted to argue, wanted to explain that she had done this before too, in buildings where real bullets flew and real people died. But she held her tongue and followed orders. The exercise began badly and got worse quickly. The simulated terrorists had indeed posted lookouts, and Team Alpha walked straight into an ambush, made tactical error after tactical error, putting his team in exposed positions and failing to account for obvious countermoves by the opposition. When two team members were declared killed by the exercise referees, Sarah's patience finally snapped. "Pull everyone back," she said sharply. "You're getting people killed." "I'm the team leader here," replied, his pride clearly wounded. "Then lead," Sarah shot back, "or get out of the way and let someone who knows what they're doing take over." Without waiting for permission, Sarah began issuing rapid-fire instructions to the remaining team members. Her voice carried an authority that made everyone stop and listen, even. "Johnson, take position at that corner and watch the north stairwell. Williams, you're on overwatch from the second-floor window. Nobody moves until I give the signal." Sarah's plan was elegant and efficient. Instead of the straight-ahead assault had favored, she orchestrated a complex multi-pronged approach that used the building's layout against the defenders. She sent one team member to create a distraction at the front, while two others moved through a basement entrance she had spotted on the blueprints. The exercise concluded in less than 10 minutes with all hostages safely recovered and all simulated terrorists neutralized. No additional team members were lost. As the teams regrouped for the after-action review, Sarah realized that everyone was staring at her. The easy confidence with which she had taken command, the tactical knowledge she had displayed, and the flawless execution of her plan had revealed far more about her background than she had intended. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes approached her as the other trainees filed out of the building. "Martinez, we need to talk." Sarah followed Hayes to a small office where the instructor closed the door and activated a white noise generator to prevent eavesdropping. "I've been doing some research on you," Hayes began, her voice carefully neutral. "Your application lists your previous employment as government contractor with very few details." Sarah remained silent, knowing that anything she said now could either help or hurt her, depending on how much Hayes had actually discovered. "The thing is," Hayes continued, "I've been in this business for 20 years. I know the difference between someone who learned tactics from a book and someone who learned them from experience. Real experience, the kind where people shoot back." Sarah met the instructor's gaze steadily. "Is there a question you'd like to ask me?" Hayes leaned back in her chair. "Who are you really, Sarah Martinez?" For a long moment, Sarah considered her options. She could continue to maintain her cover story, but it was clear that her skills were too advanced to hide. She could withdraw from the program, but that would mean giving up an opportunity she genuinely wanted to pursue. Or she could tell at least part of the truth and hope it was enough. "I worked for the government for 12 years, Sarah finally said, "in situations where discretion was important." "What kind of situations?" Sarah smiled grimly. "The kind where they don't give you a medal when you succeed, and they don't acknowledge your existence if you fail." Hayes nodded slowly, understanding passing across her features. "How long have you been out?" 3 years. "And now you want to work corporate security?" Sarah shrugged. I want to work somewhere that my skills are valued, but where I don't have to worry about whether my family will be told I died in a training accident." The two women sat in silence for several moments. Finally, Hayes spoke again. "The other trainees are starting to ask questions. Some of them are scared of you." "Should they be?" Sarah asked. Hayes considered the question carefully. "I don't think you're a danger to them, but I think you could be a danger to anyone who threatens something you care about." Sarah's smile was cold and sharp. "You're probably right about that." As Sarah left the office, she knew that her secret was out, at least partially. The question now was whether her fellow trainees could handle training alongside someone who had learned her skills in the shadows of a world they couldn't imagine. She suspected they were about to find out just how deep those shadows really went. The tension in the training program reached its breaking point during the 8th week, when cornered Sarah in the equipment room after a particularly challenging urban warfare simulation. "I know you're hiding something," said, blocking the doorway with his large frame. "Nobody learns to move like you do from weekend hunting trips with Daddy." Sarah carefully set down the tactical vest she had been returning to its storage rack. "What exactly do you think you know?" "I think you're some kind of government spook," continued, his voice rising. "I think you're here to spy on us, to evaluate us for some classified program. Well, I've got news for you, lady. I don't appreciate being lied to." Sarah turned to face him fully and took an involuntary step backward. Something in her eyes had changed, become cold and calculating in a way that made his survival instincts scream warnings. "You want the truth?" Sarah's voice was quiet, but it carried an edge that cut through the air like a blade. "You really want to know who I am?" Before could answer, the equipment room door opened and David entered, followed by 3 other trainees. They had clearly been listening to the conversation from the hallway. "Yeah," said, trying to sound braver than he felt. "We all want to know. You're not who you say you are, and we have a right to know who we're training with." Sarah looked around the room at the 5 men who had confronted her. All of them were younger, stronger, and convinced of their own toughness. All of them were about to learn how wrong they could be. "My name is Sarah Martinez," she began slowly. "For 12 years, I worked as an operative for a government agency that officially doesn't exist. My job was to eliminate high-value targets in hostile territories." The room fell silent, opened his mouth to speak, but Sarah continued before he could form words. "I've operated in 17 different countries under 14 different identities. I speak 6 languages fluently and can get by in 4 others. I've been shot 11 times, stabbed twice, and poisoned once. I've parachuted into enemy territory, swum across mined harbors, and walked through the front doors of buildings knowing I might never walk back out." Laughed nervously. "Come on, you expect us to believe." "The scar on my left shoulder is from a sniper's bullet in Damascus," Sarah interrupted, her voice never rising above conversational level. "The one on my right thigh is from shrapnel in Kandahar. The small round mark on my neck that you probably thought was a birthmark. That's from where a contact poisoned me with a syringe in Prague. I was clinically dead for 4 minutes before the antidote kicked in." The laughter died in his throat. Sarah continued, her words falling like hammer blows in the silent room. "Over the course of my career, I eliminated 137 targets. Some were terrorists planning attacks on American citizens. Some were arms dealers selling weapons to groups that killed children. Some were corrupt officials who sold information that got American soldiers killed. Each elimination was authorized at the highest levels of government and carried out with surgical precision." Had gone pale. You're talking about murder." Sarah's expression didn't change. "I'm talking about war. A war fought in the shadows by people like me so that people like you can sleep safely in your beds without knowing the things that go bump in the night." "Why are you telling us this?" whispered. "Because you demanded the truth," Sarah replied. "Because you couldn't accept that a middle-aged woman might simply be better than you at something. Because your fragile egos needed an explanation that didn't challenge your assumptions about your own superiority." She moved toward the door, and the group of men instinctively parted to let her pass. At the threshold, she turned back. "I'm here because I want a normal life. I want to use my skills to protect people instead of eliminating them. I want to go to work each day and come home each night to my daughter, who thinks I spent the last 12 years working as a translator for the State Department." Her eyes swept across each of their faces. "I'm not your enemy. I'm not here to spy on you or compete with you. I'm here because this represents a chance at redemption for someone who has done things that keep her awake at night. But if any of you ever threaten me or try to expose my identity, you'll discover that retirement doesn't mean I've forgotten how to do my job." Sarah left the equipment room, leaving 5 shaken men behind her. Word of the confrontation spread quickly through the remaining trainees, but not in the way anyone expected. Instead of fear or suspicion, Sarah found herself treated with a new kind of respect. The other trainees began coming to her for advice on techniques and tactics. They asked her to review their plans during scenario exercises. They listened when she spoke with the attention usually reserved for instructors. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes called Sarah into her office the next day. "I heard about your conversation with and his friends," Hayes said without preamble. Sarah nodded. "I may have revealed more than was wise." "On the contrary," Hayes replied, surprising her. "I think it was exactly what they needed to hear. Sometimes the best way to deal with bullies is to show them just how outclassed they really are." Hayes leaned forward in her chair. "I've made some discreet inquiries about you through my contacts. I can't get details, but I can confirm that someone with your name and description was indeed involved in classified operations for the government. Someone who was very good at her job and who left service with commendations that will never see the light of day." "Is that a problem?" Sarah asked. "The opposite," Hayes smiled. "I've been authorized to offer you a position as an assistant instructor when you complete the program. Your experience and skills would be invaluable in training the next generation of security professionals." Sarah considered the offer, teaching others to protect instead of destroy, helping them develop skills that would save lives instead of taking them. It felt like a form of penance for the years she had spent in the shadows. "I accept," she said finally. The final weeks of the training program passed quickly. Sarah excelled in every area, setting records that would stand for years to come. But more importantly, she found herself beginning to believe that redemption was possible, that her past didn't have to define her future. On graduation day, as she stood before her fellow trainees in their crisp new uniforms, Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had been underestimated, dismissed, and mocked by people who judged her based on their preconceptions. But she had proven that appearances could be deceiving, that strength came in many forms, and that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room was the one everyone overlooked. Approached her after the ceremony, looking embarrassed and contrite. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "I was wrong about you, about everything." Sarah studied his face, seeing genuine remorse there. "We all make mistakes. The important thing is learning from them." Could you teach me," he asked hesitantly, "some of those techniques you use?" Sarah smiled, and for the first time in years it reached her eyes. "I think that can be arranged." As she walked away from the graduation ceremony toward her new life as an instructor, Sarah reflected on how much had changed. She was no longer the ghost who moved unseen through enemy territory, no longer the specter who eliminated threats in the darkness. She was something new, a teacher, a mentor, a guardian who would help others learn to protect instead of destroy. The students who would sit in her classes had no idea what their new instructor had done before arriving at the training center. They didn't know about the missions in hostile territories or the targets she had eliminated in service to her country. They saw only a competent, professional woman who seemed to know more about tactics and security than anyone had a right to. And that was exactly how Sarah wanted it. Her past was a burden she would carry alone, but her future was a chance to build something better. She had spent 12 years in the shadows, invisible and deadly. Now she would step into the light and use her skills to create protectors instead of predators. The woman they had laughed at, the grandmother they had dismissed, the target they had underestimated, she had found her way home at last. Not to a place, but to a purpose. Not to forget what she had been, but to become something better. In the end,